Welcome. I just want to say I am so looking forward to my conversation today, and also want to just acknowledge you for joining us. This is Lauren Fogelman with Business Success Solution, and today's topic is solving the staffing crisis for accountants, something that is top of mind for so many accounting firms. And the person that I'm going to be meeting with today is Lawrence Whittam. So you are in the right place if you've been considering outsourcing as a staffing solution, the pros and cons to outsourcing, and then if that does interest you, how do you actually find the right outsourcing solution that's a right fit for your firm? So I suggest you have pen and paper ready because Lawrence is going to generously share a lot, and then we'll go ahead and let you know how to follow up if you want to be able to know more. A little bit about Lawrence is Lawrence Whittam. He's founder and managing director of Impact Global Solutions, and that brings over a decade of outsourcing experience, working with more than 500 accounting firms across the U.S. He is definitely a hands-on advisor, and he created IGS to solve the staffing shortage for the accounting industry. Part of what he does is he educates firm owners, he brokers relationships between the firms, as well as with the outsourcing vendors around the world. Lawrence has a deep understanding of the accounting profession. He actually helps firms prepare, streamline their processes, automate, and scale their outsourcing operations effectively. He helps these firms set up back offices, fix current outsourcing operations, or educate on how to implement additional revenue to drive activities with a successful outsourced team. And you can learn more about Lawrence and Impact Global Solutions at csuiteimpact.com, C-Suite, so that's C-S-U-I-T-E, Impact, I-M-P-A-C-T.com. And now I'd like to officially welcome Lawrence to the conversation. Lawrence, so happy to have you here and to really be focusing on this conversation today.
Yeah, nice to see you, Lauren. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And let's just jump in and find out a little bit about why you decided to develop Impact Global Solutions.
Yeah, so I just branched off recently and started Impact Global Solutions in July actually of this year, and partly because I've been in the outsourcing world. I've worked with many firms over the years, and what I found was we personally weren't always the best option. Right, there are a lot of options all over the world. There's India as a primary place, like you've got the Philippines, South Africa, you've got the US, you've got a lot of areas, and I wanted to help firms understand all of their options and not just push in one direction towards a specific firm, because I found that it's a lot about the relationship, right? You're going into a partnership and you want to make sure that you are finding the right fit for your firm. And again, some of these firms are going to start using multiple outsourcing vendors, and some of them already are. And some of these firms are also looking to build their own back offices, right? So I found that not as many people were impartial in this game, really, and trying to actually help the firms explore every option that's best for them.
And I know that staffing is probably one of the biggest challenges that firm owners face. What do you see as some of the benefits that are available when you consider outsourcing as a staffing solution?
Yeah, I mean, and there's a few areas to it. I mean, the biggest one is just finding talent, right? And there are so many options out there, but it is about understanding that, okay, which is the best fit for me. Obviously, one of the major benefits is you don't need to struggle to find the talent, right? Within a month to 2 months, you can find talent very quickly. Like, you can take it on. There's typically some cost arbitrage to it. So it actually helps out in terms of you can invest into some of these people a little bit sooner as well. It doesn't quite cost as much as hiring a more and more expensive person in the US, right, to bring them on staff. But also within the US, you can use talent and just outsource certain tax returns during certain seasons rather than hiring somebody year round. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of different varieties of ways and models that you can also outsource. So it's really just a very beneficial option for a lot of firms to utilize now.
Then part of what I'm hearing is that it really depends on the needs of that particular firm. It could be a long-term relationship with someone that you're outsourcing to, or it could be just as needed, such as for tax season. Is that correct?
Exactly, right. You've got lots of models, right? And that's where it's pretty confusing to some extent, right? Because there are just so many vendors doing different models themselves, and some do it this way, some do it that way. So I have a good grasp of who's doing what and where they're doing it and what are the options. So I try and simplify it, make sure it's of the interest for the firm, and then we engage with those types of vendors, and we help get them started as well along those lines.
Now, when someone's looking to move in this direction, I know that if this is a first time that they're looking at outsourcing, there's a lot of questions about that, as opposed to just bringing someone on as a W-2 employee in the US. What do you see as some of the common challenges that firm owners are facing when they're moving in this direction?
So I would say a lot of firms get started with outsourcing, and they pick a vendor, right? So they go through the vetting process, they do the due diligence, and they get started officially. But then they struggle to either get buy-in from the rest of the team members in their office to actually outsource some of the work. That's probably one of the most common challenges, where it sort of gets stuck and you end up not utilizing the team members that are available to them. So then you end up having a firm use maybe a person, or just do it for a few projects every so often, rather than actually passing on more and more work and giving yourself more time as a business owner, especially with the small firms. It's give yourself more time to now scale and keep growing and going out and focusing on your business a little bit, rather than just outsourcing a smaller portion where now you don't really have much flexibility, and you're also not allowing the outsourcing firm to learn because you're not giving them enough work to test them on and train them. And I would say the second one is feedback, right? Is they expect the work to come back a lot of the times because of expectations are set. Yeah, they're going to help you with this, and they sort of expect the work back 100% complete straight away. It takes time, right? This is talent that we're talking about. It's you typically hire somebody, it takes 6 months to a year to get them really fully running in your firm. Typically, it's the same with outsourcing, right? You've got to educate them, you've got to teach them, help them with the process, and give them feedback is very important. Because if you're not giving feedback, active feedback, where it's very very recent feedback for work projects, and you just wait until the end of tax season, the process isn't going to improve as you're going along.
And I think that is so true with any staffing solution, whether it's actually bringing someone on as an employee or outsourcing. So do you find that in the beginning, maybe there's a certain amount of time that you ought to be setting aside or building in to be able to meet and train someone so that it's a more successful solution?
Exactly, right. I mean, the outsourcing is a project in itself, right? It's a new project that a firm needs to spend time on. Right, they can't just expect it to come back perfect. They need to learn about the person that they're working with, build that relationship so that you're on the same path. And that means having strategic meetings with them, right? That means going over certain projects, having feedback meetings, right? And there needs to be stuff set on the calendar. And it may not be in the mid-sized firms to a smaller firm with a structure. It may not be the partner every time, but it may be a manager that's dealing with this, right? But there has to be some of that day-to-day and weekly interaction.
Mm-hmm. And part of what I see is that there's a couple of different ways to outsource. One can be directly with someone who's a contract worker, 1099, and then the other way is with an agency. What do you see as the difference between those two options?
So there's the contractor approach, as you said, right? So there are plenty of options both internally in the US and offshore where you can utilize full-time employees, right? And you're paying either an hourly rate or a full-time rate for them, right? And you don't have to think about the actual compliance piece of hiring a staff member, and you don't have all the added pieces to it. Sometimes that's on a yearly engagement, sometimes that's on a month-to-month engagement, depending upon the type of firm that you're working with. And then there are also sort of like those, like we said, more the project based, right? Where you can literally set up how many returns, when you need to do this. And it goes into somewhat of a pool where you don't necessarily know the individual work you're working with, but you're working with, there should be still direct people that you're working with hands-on, teaching, educating so that they can teach their team, right? But then they should have certain standards and KPIs set up, key progress indicators and standard operating procedures they're following, so that you know that when the work comes back, okay, yeah, they've hit these metrics that we wanted them to, and they have to be agreed upon.
Excellent. And one of the questions that I hear a lot, especially when we're talking about offshore instead of onshore, is security. And how do you deal with sensitive client information? So is there any maybe standards that you recommend regarding security when you're looking to outsource some of your work?
Yeah, so one of the most common things is not sending information, right? We're in a sort of day and age with how our technology is, where you should have your own cloud environment. You may have a local network, right? It's easier to let somebody in with restricted access, right? Create a user, get your IT team to create a user for them that has restricted access, right? You can separate certain drives in your networks as well, so that they don't have free roam and see every client, right? Because there's also the 7216 disclosure that comes in with the individual tax returns as well. So you're able to separate information. And this goes for internally with a firm as well, right? I mean, your employees shouldn't have full roam access to all your clients realistically, especially if you're using more and more virtual employees all around the world, or all around the US as well, right? They could be an employee, they still shouldn't. Well, why give them access to the clients that they don't need to have access to, right? In a lot of cases. So you can restrict a lot of that. A lot of the tax software, a lot of the accounting software allows you to, and a lot of the storage pieces do. So that's sort of the starting point of just making sure that you have control of your systems. Make sure that your IT sets it up in a way where it's secure. It's not overly complicated to do. It's just making sure that they understand that here's my goal. I need them to be working by XYZ date, right? So let's make sure there's something in place where we've got control over the access. Okay, we shouldn't be sending documents back and forth so that they can do it on their systems. That's an older way of doing it. It's not as secure. That's how things get lost. And unless all that's encrypted, it's not as secure to do.
Okay, so part of what I'm hearing is restricting access internally, but one of the things that I've seen with a lot of outsourced agencies is they have their own protocols and securities in place also. Can you explain part of what you ought to be looking at regarding the security part with an outsourcing agency?
Yeah, so part of it is certification, right? So a lot of these outsourcing firms, like they go through different certifications, right? Such as SOC 2 compliance, right? And they'll actually do third-party testing to check on all their protocols internally. ISO is another one as well, an international standard. And they get third parties to come in and do an assessment. So it's good to ask for those types of certificates that they've got and when did they do the last audit. But I've personally been to India multiple times, and a lot of the firms that I personally recommend, and their offices are out of this world in terms of they're way ahead of what a lot of firms are over here. Physical security, cameras, keycard access, biometric scanners, and it's sort of like, it's just like going into an office in one of the major cities, really. So as long as they have that, right? And I always ask during my due diligence to see their offices as well, is the other big thing, right? Ask them to get some pictures of their offices, right? We want to see what they've got set up. Do they have antivirus? Do they have firewalls set up, right? Make sure they have, how are they working? Are they working in the office, externally? Do they provide the laptops? Do they not provide the laptops? The same sort of questions that you would ask for your firm, right? You need to be asking them, right? Typically, a lot of them go above and beyond though, from that perspective. But that's where it's like, they're coming into your system, they're going into your client. So you can control a lot more so from your side. Even if it's an unsecure network on their side, you can limit the access where it's not going to cause you risk, really, as long as you set it up correctly.
I really appreciate you expanding on that. And one of the things that never occurred to me, and I think is really golden, is to get pictures and ask to see what the office setup is like, because I think that visual and actually seeing some of the things that they do, where everybody comes in, maybe they have to put all their phones and technology in lockers, they can't bring it into the workspace. Yeah. It's very, very impressive.
Exactly. I mean, it's things like that you the processes were around, but even in the US, like I would go into offices and I see paper everywhere. I see phones everywhere. People are on their phones at the desks, right? And it's fine. I understand that they're not your employees, right? They are a third party coming into your network and working with you, right? So there's a certain level of trust that needs to be there. But a lot of these outsourcing firms go above and beyond because they're not just working with one CPA firm, they're typically
Yes.
working with multiple, right? So it's even more highly strong in those areas as well. And a lot of them are working internationally. So Europe has very, very high data security restrictions that have to go on. So they have even higher protocols they have to follow than in the US sometimes.
And I know that there's so many different options as far as outsourcing. So this is a two-part question. Where are some of the firms outsourcing to, and any concerns as far as language or time zone differences?
So I would say the most common areas that I'm seeing right now, so there's India and the Philippines, very well developed, right, in terms of the outsourcing space. South Africa is another one, right? And then the third being South America is starting to pop up more and more, right? And the reason for South America is partly there's a bit of untapped talent there in terms of like nearshoring, we would call it as well, where the time zone is central time typically, so a lot closer to the US side, very helpful for the West Coast, for the US side of things. And Mexico being one of the major hubs, but also different areas within South America, you can find talent that knows, especially in the accounting arena, good talent. I'd say less developed on the tax side, right? But you can also find audit. And they've worked for a lot of larger companies typically because you've got sort of the Shells of the world and a lot of these complex corporate structures that have offices back there, and they're doing US work, right? South Africa is pretty developed in the auditing side of things and has been for a while. It's a little bit closer as well from a comparison of price to the US side of things. But again, very good communication skills there and good experienced talent. And then India has a bit of everything. And the Philippines limitation is tax really right now. India's limitation is communication, I would say. Typically, you're going to find slightly better communication in the Philippines. It's definitely improving everywhere, just with the timing of it's becoming more and more frequent. People are using it and they're developing the outsourcing models a lot as well now. So India knows their weakness, right? And they're developing models around it to put the best communicators in touch with them. Same with the Philippines, they've been developing tax for a number of years now. And again, it started 5, 6, 7 years ago, right? So you're not going to find huge talent specialists in the tax arena, but you'll find some good senior tax people now. So everywhere is sort of tapping into it and really trying to improve themselves. And there's some pretty big players in each space, really putting a lot of money and effort behind it and to develop the industry.
And part of what I've seen is definitely India and the Philippines are the things that come to mind first. I think that Mexico and South America is a hidden gem, not just because of the time zone, but because there's a large population of Spanish-speaking people in the US, and it allows you then to really be able to offer bilingual services, whereas you might not be able to do that otherwise. The other thing that I think comes up as a concern is the time zone. And what I've seen, Lawrence, and I just want to make sure that you see that too, is a lot of times they'll adapt to the US time zone and they'll be working a night shift where they live in order to be able to be working during US hours. Is that what you've seen pretty much also?
Yeah, a lot of them are. I would say they definitely have mixed, right? So they'll typically have 2 time zones that they work in. So a lot of these outsourcing firms will have more of a US time zone that they're working in. I would say on average it goes until the latest is sort of around 3 p.m. right, Eastern time. You will find firms or individuals that will go later. Those types of individuals will probably burn out pretty quickly though. They'll need breaks where they're not doing that such late nights because that's typically like 1 or 2 a.m. for them, right? So it's really like a graveyard shift. But a lot of them have got used to it, but then they also have morning shifts, right? So it's important to understand as well, like there are benefits to using overnight, right, type of work. Like for the tax season side of things, let me get my team, as long as they understand our process and they've been in the US hours, they've helped us, Is it going to help us if they go to the morning shift now? Now they can maybe turn around the preparation overnight for us. Now our reviewers can come in and start the work immediately, right? So there are some major benefits to it, but it's good to have a balance between the two.
Mm-hmm. And I think that is something I've seen also. One of my clients actually outsources somebody in Israel. And so they were sending tax work to be done before the end of business day in the US. And it was already done by the time that they fired up their computer in the morning because of the change in the time zones. So,
Yep. Yeah. And that's the big thing, right? I mean, these are the areas around the US that are predominant in this industry. You can go, there are places in Europe that are doing outsourcing. There's Israel, like there's a lot of places out there. And again, this is where I'm impartial to it. So if there's people that you've reached out to and had conversations with as well, I'm happy to help make sure that they go through a proper due diligence check, make sure they are setting the correct expectations, because that's a big thing, making sure that who you're talking to can do what they're saying they can do, right? So we do reference checks and everything like that. So it's really impartial to who they're using. I just want to make sure firms are using good companies, really, at the end of the day, that are secure.
Right.
And on top of that, they're outsourcing the right way and putting the best practices in place so that they can grow and leverage it appropriately.
And with that being said, is there maybe some indicators when a firm is actually ready to outsource?
So, and that is one of those heated questions, to be honest, like loaded questions to some extent, in terms of, I have seen sole proprietors outsourcing and doing a great job outsourcing very early in the career and growing because of it, right? So I would say that it needs to be when either A, you're just looking for talent and you're not being able to keep it consistently, right? So if you're always looking for talent because one person comes, one person goes, right? Definitely an option for outsourcing, because you can build a bit of bandwidth that way, right? You've got that overflow protection. If you're a smaller firm, a solo, and you're sort of doing a lot of it yourself, right? Don't wait until you are glass full, right? You need to be, even if it's getting close to 3/4, go and take a quarter off. You don't need to start by hiring a full-time person, but go and start the process, start building that relationship. And then again, you've then got a bit more of your time back. Now you can go and keep building the business, right? Because otherwise we sort of get caught up in the task of doing the work. And that's what stunts a lot of small firm growth. And there's so much trickling down from the bigger firms calling clients as well, right? So it always trickles down. There's plenty of business to be got, right? But it's very important to make sure you've got an opening in your glass so that you can take it on without sacrificing your life to do so, right? In that sense, and now not having any family time, now not even having any time whatsoever during tax season, right? You don't want to burn yourself dry doing it. You can build a very sustainable way to grow with outsourcing.
Then some of the things that I'm seeing that you said is it could solve just the turnover concern that you're having and give you more consistency, because there's definitely a time cost when you have to go ahead and start training someone new over and over and over again because of the fact that people are coming and going in your own firm. But the other thing is, if you're a smaller firm or maybe a solo firm owner, looking at when you're at your capacity issue, if you find that you're at about 3/4 full, then it's time to really begin getting some of those low-level things off your plate so that you can work on your own business development. And what I've seen is that, especially with the smaller firms, it's a big decision deciding to outsource, whether we're doing it onshore or offshore, because it changes the dynamics of the firm. We're no longer doing everything yourself. And what I feel is that once you make the decision, you actually do it, you realize what a blessing it's been. But it's really getting to that point of being open to it that's going to make a difference.
Exactly. Yeah, completely agreed.
And do you see that there's some maybe future trends happening with outsourcing?
Yeah. So again, it's right now, as you said at the beginning, it's such a hot topic, right? With the staffing shortages and problems. I mean, there are some firms doing some pretty interesting new ways of outsourcing and bringing people into the US now and from offshore, right? So you're able to get that. I do see, and obviously we see in this industry a lot of M&A going on, right? So there's a lot of mergers, acquisitions. So talent is always needed, but what you're going to find is you're going to struggle if you don't have options from the talent perspective, right? You're either going to have to settle for being a certain size of a business, because there just isn't enough accountants in the US, right? And realistically, there isn't enough accountants worldwide, right, to do it all. However, you're at a point right now, a good stepping stone where you can start building and at least have the bandwidth to then grow, right? Otherwise, with all these mergers and acquisitions, people are still calling clients, right? People need accountants, right? At the end of the day, there are a lot, even with AI and technology, it needs to be a balance between the two. Technology and staffing, 100%. It's got to be a fine balance, and the technology is improving, reducing staffing needs to certain extents. But certain people need to be there to use the technology, right? It's a need, but there'll always be a need for certain things. The audits, right? I mean, audits need to get done, right? Same thing with the taxes. It's not about necessarily 100% of the tax prep needs to be done by somebody now. There is some technology that can help with that, but then it needs to be the thought process of the planning side of things, and actually working with somebody that their personal life, their personal goals affect what actually you want to do with your tax planning, right? So there are lots of things that are going to be needed, and I can't see this problem going away very, very quickly. However, there are such a large amount of solutions coming out that we need to just take advantage of what we've got and stop complaining about a staffing problem when there is staff to use, right? That's the big thing in the industry.
And part of what I think also, as far as staffing solutions go, when we're talking about outsourcing, is that you might actually start with someone at a lower level, more entry level, and actually, because they're someone dedicated to your firm, you can train them up into a more advanced level position, just like if you were bringing on your own employee.
Correct. And in addition to that, I am seeing more and more firms now wanting to take equity in the talent that they've got offshore, right? So you are going to find more and more firms having their own back offices as well, right? And that gives a new opportunity to, I know firms that are helping other CPA firms expand into these different countries as well. And again, it's a matter of preference again, right? But they want to take ownership because they don't want to go 3-5 years down the line building talent. They get a nice big team, and now they've got no way of actually retaining that team because it's not their talent, right?
Right.
So there are techniques we can do now and talk to some of these firms, and also build it yourself, right? Where you can own that talent, right? And it's not worth it until you get to certain sizes, but you can do it and you can own it yourself, right? And then you can keep growing, and that adds value to your business as well, because now you've got another office somewhere else with talent that you can utilize.
Creates a whole new stream of revenue. So
correct.
And the other thing is, let's just face it, firm owners are busy people, and they might find that outsourcing is attractive, especially going offshore, but they don't want to have to do all the research, navigate the process. So what do you see as the benefits of actually engaging someone like you as an outsourcing coach or broker?
So, and this is where I personally don't see anybody in the industry, and this is why I create Impact Global Solutions that's truly helping the CPA firm's best interests to do what they want to do and put it in and create it like they want it created, right, to fit their firm. I've been in the outsourcing world. I've faced so many problems working with over 500 firms over the years that typically I will have been through the problem, and I've probably had 5 to 10 solutions for that one problem, because every firm's different and they need a different solution, right? So rather than testing and stuff like that, I can come in and I can help them speed up that process, where now a problem doesn't become a giant headache, right? We can make sure we put processes in place with these outsourcing firms. And I typically know the cultures in these areas as well and how they work. So I know how to get the problems resolved very quickly, in comparison to, again, some people I know have been working on problems for a number of months, right? And it's only escalated, right? But then we've immediately made, just by a 20-30 minute call with them, I've been able to then alleviate some of the pain, where we've created a lot more clarity between the relationship, right, with the outsourcing firm and the CPA firm. And that's the big thing. I don't think if you're spending years working with a partner outsourcing firm, I don't want to go in there and change the outsourcing firm, because you should have built a relationship in that amount of time. But it's about, there are things to improve on it and there are things to fix. And let's aim to fix it first, right? Let's see if we can fix it. If we can't, let's have a backup plan, right? But there's a lot of ways that I've been through all the problems. I'm sure there'll be new problems down the line, but I can also help with persuading team members, partners to understand the process. And my understanding is education is key to people being involved in it. If they feel educated on the topic and how it will work, then they're more likely to do something. Then right now, a lot of the outsourcing firms may say, hey, listen, just get an FTE, get an individual, and then we'll work on it, right? Mine is, no, I'll tell you how the whole process will go. I'll tell you what it'll look like, and let's go over it. Let's go over the concerns, and let's put a plan in place then, right? So that everybody's comfortable. And then we stick to the plan, so that, just like in any type of business, like having a coach is very important to make sure that you are continuously motivated to put time into it, and making sure you're taking the right steps forward and not just dwelling on certain aspects.
And I think that one of the things that you're talking about is that you know both sides. You know the challenges that the firm owners are experiencing, as well as having relationships with the different agencies involved. And as a result of that, you can probably go ahead and communicate on someone's behalf to be able to resolve something faster and better than if they were trying to do it themselves.
Mediation to some extent, right? At some point,
absolutely.
Yeah. So, but it's just it is that. It's exactly that. It's the experience has been there. I've been doing it for a long time, and I really enjoy the industry, right? So I really took a lot of time and effort to understand the firms I was working with when I was with the previous outsourcing firm, right? So I know the processes. I know what they want to do. I know the software. I know all that, but I also know the goals that typically firms are looking for, and also the outsourcing firms. So it's now combining that, so it's a win-win solution, is very important, right? We can't have one expectation up here and the other one coming down here, because it's just not going to be a good mesh.
Absolutely. Anyway, we have covered so much today, Lawrence. Some of the things that we talked about was considering outsourcing as a staffing solution, the pros and cons, and then finding that solution that's right for your firm. So I just want to have you share, if somebody wanted to talk further with you and interested in what Impact Global Solutions has to offer, what's the best way for them to connect?
So you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm sure it will be on here, my contact information, but also L Whittam, LWHITTAM for Mary, at C-Suite, CSUITE impact.com. Okay. And it's and again, the accent may be modeled up a few of the letters, so but L Whittam at csuiteimpact.com.
Perfect. Lawrence, once again, thank you for the engaging conversation. For everybody joining us, this is Warren Fogelman with Business Success Solutions, showing accounting professionals how to double their income working half the time.